All right, welcome to the LSG podcast, season 2, episode 7, take number 2. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you will notice that there is a webcam missing. Discord wasn't cooperating with audio, so we moved over to Facebook. Facebook isn't cooperating on video, but has good audio. So, we're back again on Monday instead of Sunday. If you watched last night, the couple minutes we attempted to have this podcast, you will hopefully experience a better time today.
Oh yeah.
I am LSG Lou, founder of Last Thought Gaming, and with me today, as always, is Lou. For the two people that don't know you, Lou, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, what is up, everybody? I'm Lou. As you guys don't know me, I've been playing VGC like 4-5 years. I've cut, other than my first season, I've cut a regional every single year I've been playing. I've made Worlds 3 times, all 3 seasons that I was playing really seriously, and I've qualified for Worlds. Played in Worlds a lot, gone to Nationals a lot, and I've got some experience under my belt. I'm not the best player in the world. I'm pretty well known in the community, but outside of the VGC community, you maybe might not have heard of me. But I feel like I have enough knowledge in the game to be able to try to impart some information about VGC to everybody who's listening today.
So I'm getting excited because I found out that my emote's live on Twitch just now. Got a little distracted. So the last couple episodes in this series, we discussed a lot of entry-level VGC stuff. The first episode we dedicated, to talking about what VGC is, how to get into it, etc. On the second episode, we started talking a little bit about Dynamax and what made certain Pokemon dominant in the meta versus others. So for today, the topic on the board is team building. Like you and I were discussing this. We've discussed this a lot, actually. Team building is something that very much makes VGC unique when compared to other esports. Like Magic the Gathering might have something similar in like deck building, but as far as more traditional esports and video games, it's a unique aspect outside of the game that largely affects the game itself. Um, how would you outline your thoughts on team building for those that aren't necessarily familiar with the concept?
See, team building is really interesting because I think it's what gives VGC its depth. For example, you could have this is probably the best example, right? Last year was VGC 2019 Worlds was Ultra Series. For the first regional of Ultra Series, I brought 6 Pokemon to the first regional, and I didn't do too well. It was fun. I liked the team. It was great. A few months later, Worlds comes around, and the same 6 Pokemon that I brought to the first regional of the year ended up being the same 6 Pokemon that won the World Championships. However, not a single one of those Pokemon that were the same actually did the same thing. They all had different functions that they were playing on the team. They all had different EVs. They all had different moves, and the teams played completely differently. And that's what team building really does in VGC. It gives you that depth to customize your Pokemon at a level that you don't really get in other esports. And it lets you do it before the tournament even begins. You can come in with game plans. You can come in trying to counter the meta. You could come in trying to run the meta if you think the meta is actually the play because it reduces a bunch of variance. Just basically the depth that you can go to that team building provides is really what makes VGC and where a lot of the top players get their edges and matches and get their competitive edges from.
Right. So what do you prefer personally? I know you had that infamous Tentacruel team that was your first time cutting a regional, right? With the
Yeah,
Tentacruel?
first time ever I cut a regional was with Tentacruel, which is a Pokemon that is otherwise never. In the false swipe, I think I mentioned this last podcast, but in the false swipe gaming video they put out about how good Tentacruel is actually, they don't even mention it in VGC. That's how bad it is. But I was still able to get top 8 at I think 400-man regional with it because I've realized it had a niche. It had that niche that you needed.
So what do you prefer in general? Do you prefer meta stuff or counter meta when you team build?
I think it depends entirely on the tournament. It depends entirely on the region that you're playing in, and it depends on where in the format you are. Like how far developed along the format is. Because I think there's this weird time where at the start of a format, everybody knows what's good, right? Like everyone's figured out what's really good, but no one has really figured out what beats what's really good yet. There's that weird time where I think running like a standard meta team is almost always going to be the call, unless you yourself have labbed and figured out how to beat the meta. But I think in that regard, that's like one time that going with like a standard like meta team is usually going to be the play. The other time is if the format is in a state where a lot of people are playing matchup roulette. Matchup roulette meaning there's a few common archetypes that are going around. Like, just for this example, say there's like a sun archetype that's going around, and then there's like this other standard archetype going around. Then there's like this really obscure hyper offense team and a rain team. So there's like these four different archetypes, and they kind of play rock, paper, scissors with each other. So that like one archetype is going to beat this archetype most of the time, but it's going to get beat by this. So you end up playing this matchup roulette where a lot of times the games are being decided by what team you're facing against instead of who's making the better plays during the game. And I think whenever the meta's in that kind of a chaotic state, running and taking a meta approach is very successful because it's going to reduce the amount of variance that can occur over the course of those matchup roulette. And I think when it comes to anti-meta is usually really successful when everybody's running meta. When you can guarantee that like at least over half of the sets I play are going to be against a specific team. Because the problem with anti-meta teams is that whenever anti-meta teams face each other, it can get really chaotic, and there's a lot of uncertainty involved, not only because you have no practice playing against a certain matchup, but it's something that your team hasn't been stress tested against. And so, but if you know, like, oh, I have a game plan for the first like 3 or 4 turns against like this specific team that my anti-meta team is ready to face off against, then you know that your anti-meta approach is going to be really successful.
Right. Another thing that really a situation where anti-meta can be quite kind of strong is best of ones versus best of threes. So a lot of like regionals and such are best of three, but the new online tournament that was announced like roughly a week ago now, the games were this weekend, right? The first round of
Yeah,
games.
yeah.
Um, that was best of one. So what team did you bring for that? And how did the best of one versus best of three, how does that affect your team building?
I think for best of 3, bringing a team that's a lot more standard is typically going to play into your favor a little bit more. Because in best of 1, all you really need, especially in Pokemon and especially with Dynamax and VGC 2020, you just need one turn to win a game, really. You need like one ally switch to win a game, or you need like one surprise taunt that can deny a trick room or something like that. So I think bringing a lot of meta teams that are as flexible as they can possibly be is definitely like more successful, or the meta teams are more successful in best of 3, and it's better if you're flexible in best of 3 as well, because you can adjust to one of those surprise techs that catch you off guard in games 2 and 3 whenever you play them. But in best of 1, if one of those like surprise techs is going to pop off and like catch you and cost you the game, then you know that then you didn't play it right, really.
Right.
Because a lot of people are crying about how, especially after like a lot of people did bad in the recent best of 1 tournament, and I did bad as well. I did absolutely terrible. But the thing is, like, I'm not crying about how, oh, the format's bad because of it. Like I was able to look at my team and realize that, like, oh, I was not preparing myself and not giving myself enough cushions for when things go wrong. Even though I think my team is brilliant for best of 3, in a best of 1 scenario, I wasn't necessarily prepared to deal with like turn 1 ally switch or like a couple rock slide flinches. And that's a problem with like team building, and that's a problem you overcome with team building. People often don't understand that team building is within itself an exercise in reducing variance in Pokemon, instead of just trying to find something that's cool or something that's really good.
Right. When it comes to team building, when it comes to starting, where do you start? Like you've once you are locked in, like okay, this is the event I'm building for. I want to do something either meta or non-meta. What is your next step when you decide what actual Pokemon you're going to use? Like how do you go about filling that first slot?
Yeah, and this is something that a lot of new players struggle with, and team building in general is really daunting for new players because whenever you sit down to like build for an event or decide you're going to go to a Pokemon event, you'll like open Pokemon Showdown, you open up a team builder and just be like, wait, where do I even begin? And even some more experienced players struggle with this to a certain degree, though a lot of the more experienced players struggle with trying to find that final piece to fill out a team. But in anyway, regardless, whenever you sit down and you've decided to go into an event, you're going to start building a team. The place to start, like a really good starting block, is typically one concept or like one really strong Pokemon or one combo, like combination of two Pokemon that cover a lot of the format or are really good against the current meta. And a good example of this, I think, in this format is Togekiss, Dragapult, Excadrill. That's like one core that's like really strong. So if you're gonna start team building, you might just be like, okay, I don't really know where to start. I'm just gonna put like these three really strong Pokemon that synergize well together down and try to fill in the gaps in a way because they cover so much of the format. You can then fill it in with other Pokemon that are really good against opposing matchups. So you can say, my team's really good against or my Togekiss Dragapult, my Excadrill is good. It covers a lot of it, a lot of the format, but it doesn't beat opposing Excadrill plus T-Tar. So then you have to be like, okay, I need to add a Pokemon that helps versus opposing Excadrill and T-Tar. So then you'll maybe add like a Rotom Wash onto that or something. And you'll just keep going from there, and you'll keep getting practice games, and you'll keep finding Pokemon that beat certain things but help you in other matchups, and just kind of keep adjusting your team as you go along with other Pokemon that help you out in spots where you think you're weak. And I think also another really important aspect of team building is never being afraid to adjust your team, right? Even if you started with like one concept or one idea, then you kind of branch off and add a few other Pokemon. You might come to the point where you realize, wait, these other Pokemon I added are really, really strong and are ending up being a crux of what I'm bringing to matchups. And sometimes the Pokemon I started with is something I'm not bringing a lot. So maybe you got to have that flexibility to maybe swap that out and find something more useful for you as well.
Right. What are some of your favorite concepts or like core team types to build around? I know when we did a team building session like the week before last on Thursday, where we played Hard Trick Room. We built a team around in D and Hack. What are some of the other core concepts or core combinations that you like to build around in this format?
I think when it comes to building in this format, I think having like a flexible team that's got enough resistances and immunities and defensive backbone to stall out your opponent's Dynamax without you having to Dynamax yourself is very, very useful. So because of that, I think a lot of cores that are super strong running around right now are Steel Dragon Fairy cores, and I think ever since Gen 6 when Fairy type was introduced, that's been something that a lot of people have understood. Because like statistically, the Steel type is really like the best type in the game. Even before they added Fairy type, it was one of the best types in the game when you look at its resistances and its immunities and what it hits for super effective. And I think now that also we exist in a format where there's not a lot of redirection. There's like two Pokemon, I think, or three Pokemon. I guess not four that really have redirection. It's Clefairy, Clefable, and DDD and Togekiss that have redirection. They're pretty much the only ones that really get it. Togekiss is especially strong because it gets that redirection. It can Dynamax to max Airstream to control speed. Meanwhile, what hits Togekiss for super effective? You have Rock that hits Togekiss for super effective. You have Steel that hits it for super effective. Poison and Electric. Look at Excadrill. Excadrill is immune to Poison and Electric, resists Steel, and double resists Rock. So the way that they synergize together to switch into each other's perfectly as well. Excadrill gets hit by ground types for super effective. It gets hit by fighting types for super effective. Togekiss double resists fighting, and it's immune to ground. So when you realize that these Pokemon are like incredibly strong, they have amazing stats, and they have this perfect synergy together, you'll be able to realize that like when you're team building, these Pokemon are just excellent together and far better together than any other Pokemon in the format really can be. And they offer so much more depth with Togekiss being able to follow me and Excadrill being able to Swords Dance and stuff like that. Like the depth of which that combination goes is incredibly deep. So especially if you're a new player, I would suggest running some form of like Excadrill, Dragapult, Togekiss, because when you're new to the game, I feel like a lot of times people try to just team build without really understanding what goes into a good team. And while I think it's definitely important for you to team build at almost pretty much like all times while you're playing VGC, because it increases the ceiling that you can reach to and what you can really accomplish in your time as a player, I think when you're a newer player, most of your time should be spent practicing and getting better at the game mechanically than team building, especially because through playing you start to understand different elements and different things that go into a team being good that you wouldn't necessarily get from just putting Pokemon in your team builder.
Right. Let's go over real quick the quick archetypal stuff for individual teams. So we talked about the balanced team comps. You referred to it as good stuffs yesterday.
Yeah.
Togekiss, Excadrill fit well in that.
Dragapult,
Dragapult.
Tyranitar, Rotom Wash, stuff like that.
Right, and then we have some hyper offensive teams, defensive teams, and trick room teams. What are some quick examples of Pokemon that would fit in like hyper offense or weather based teams? And then on the flip side, more defensive minded team comps.
Yeah, I usually see hyper offenses like kind of kamikaze style. And a lot of times, those hyper offense teams typically consist of weather, like a lot of sun teams that just want to get as much damage out as fast as they can, or rain teams that just want to smack you in the rain fast, hard, and pick up KOs before you're able to move. I think that's really what characterizes a hyper offense team. You want to pick up KOs before your opponent is able to attack. And it's easy to win games if that's what you're doing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I view the balance and good stuffs team as teams that are built with the ability to do both, with the ability to try to be offensive and pick up KOs when they need to, but also the ability to switch them out, switch around, make defensive switches, and have solid synergy. And that's something that hyper offense teams can't do. Whenever hyper offense teams get caught out by like one hard read from their opponent, that's usually the end of the game. But with these good stuff teams, you can play a strategy that's a little bit more balanced. You can make a defensive switch. And I think that's definitely better in the current environment because of Dynamax. And with the defensive teams kind of don't really exist anymore because of Dynamax, because it's too easy for people with Dynamax to set up. There's, I think, only a couple really solid defensive teams that I've seen be made. They have stuff like Life Dew on a lot of Pokemon, a lot of recovery moves. But they're, for the most part, like, disappeared from VGC in this format just because Dynamax can break through a lot of the defensive cores that exist.
Right, so we're not going to see like toxic stalling or stealth rocks teams anymore.
It is gone. Yeah. Or I guess another form of a defensive team that existed in the past was like evasion teams with like Chansey and stuff that would just try to get up like as many double teams as possible, or I forget the exact strategy that people would use with Chansey. Oh, guard split. They would use guard split. They would use Carbink and Smeargle, and they go follow me Trick Room. Then in Trick Room they'd explode and like protect or something to get Chansey on the field for free, and then guard split to switch Carbink's defenses with Chansey's defenses, and then start going for like double teams or minimizes. Minimize, I think, boosts it more than double team. And then they would go for minimizes, and you'd be like, wow, I just can't beat Chansey. And then it just toxic everything and soft boiled a lot, and you just lose. But now we have a different timer, so that's not as effective. We have Dynamax, so that's not as effective. I mean, I don't even think we have this Pokemon available for that strategy to be effective. But even if it was, like, max moves can't miss, so I don't think it'd be that strong anyways. So yeah, the defensive strategies are kind of gone, and I don't think they're going to really come back as long as Dynamax exists. And I think hard trick room as like the last one of those team archetypes is in a way hyper offense, because the goal is like get trick room up and win before trick room ends, or do enough damage to where like it's easy for you to win outside of trick room after it's over. So I view hard trick room as kind of a hyper offensive variant in a way, but just since you go about building it so differently than you would any other team, I don't want to put it in the same category as hyper offense.
Right. Last week it was last week on the podcast when we were talking about Dynamax, we talked a lot about speed control and the importance of speed control. So hyper offense teams and hard trick room teams both do rely on some level, at least, on speed control, be it by running Excadrill and Sand, or
Prankster
Tailwind,
Pin, yeah,
or in the case of Trick Room, obviously Trick Room. So it's
yeah.
two sides of the same coin. Two very different approaches to controlling speed.
Yeah, they're kind of inversed on each other. And it's usually the same kind of dynamic where you have the thing that's going to set up your speed, and then the objective is while you have your speed, get the heavy hitter, like the hitter that plows through the most of your opponent's team out on the field at the same time. Or in hard trick room, it's normally you identify, oh, if I get these two Pokemon next to each other with X amount of turns left in trick room, like from team preview, you'll be able to identify that, oh, I win if I do this.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times when you're playing hard trick room, you'll end up trying to find yourself or get yourself in that position. And same whenever you're going with hyper offense. You just try to find that position where you get your pins.
And if you're super into hard trick room and want to watch a lot on that, I am going to upload the Why I Suck episode where you and I talked about team building. I'm going to upload that to YouTube just so that way we have literal hours of content for people who are interested in trick room and want to watch starting a team from complete scratch, building it, and then testing it in Showdown. Because Trick Room's, like you hinted upon, it's a whole different animal, and it's something that we can dedicate. We could talk about Trick Room for literal hours on end and not discuss everything that goes into it. So I will have that up on YouTube tomorrow. And you can listen and watch a lot of Trick Room gameplay. How do you decide what archetype you're going to build? What makes, again, when you're preparing for an event, what makes one of the archetypes stand out over the other? You talked about favoring a lot of like good stuff comps with Togekiss, Excadrill, Dragapult. But if you're going to pivot to another one, how would you make that decision?
I think a lot of it comes down to what you think you're going to be facing against at your tournament and what gives you the best chance to win. Because I mentioned earlier how balanced and good stuff's kind of it gives you like more room for leeway in matches than with hyper offense. Because a lot of times if you make one mistake or get hard red on one turn with hyper offense, you lose all of your pressure, and your pressure is what's like getting you W's. However, if you can find a way to very consistently have that hyper offensive pressure going and not lose it, then why would you? Then the variance that would come with the balance and the good stuffs team would be less than the hyper offense. You can just find that way to keep the offensive pressure up consistently. And I think a really good example of that is a team I used in 2019 to finish second at Seattle Regionals. It was in like a legendary format, like Uber's format, GS Cup, if you will, where I had like, Kyogre and stuff. And I just realized that if you lead like Tapu Koko and Lunala, you give like Lunala Electric Seed, which boosts its defense, you can run a lot of different options on those two Pokemon that guarantee you speed control early on in the game. So I would have Skydrop on Tapu Koko so they could like pick something up to get around redirection, and then Roar on Lunala. So I could like Skydrop, Roar, Trick Room setup. I could Skydrop, Roar, Xerneas if it goes for Geomancy. And if they don't have any setup or like Trick Room, I could have Electro Web on Tapu Koko. So I could go for like Electro Web and Tailwind. So even if they go for Tailwind, I'm guaranteed to be faster in Tailwind. Then I could go for Skydrop on Tapu Koko and switch to Kyogre or something, because that would remove something from the field. I get Kyogre in, and then I can drop it down and guaranteed hit it with Water Spouts that are really fast. So I realized that this is a really hyper-offensive team, and if one thing goes wrong, like I don't get Tailwinds up at the right time, or I lose them all when I'm not supposed to lose, I'm not supposed to lose it, the entire plan falls apart. and I just lose. But I realized that I had the tools available to me in order to guarantee myself speed control and guarantee myself offensive pressure. And we were at a point in the meta where no one really had practiced against this archetype. No one knew how to break it down in game. No one was prepared in team building for it. So I was able to just breeze through the tournament a lot of the time and just continue just annihilating teams. And I think that's a good example of where you can realize that hyper offense actually gives you more odds to win than good stuffs because people aren't prepared and people haven't built to beat hyper offense. But I've also played tournaments where I've brought good stuffs, and that was the play for me. Like I finished top 4 at the Nashville Open using just straight good stuffs team. Like a team that had been used since like the first week of the format. Brought that and finished top 4 because I thought that people were going to be making a lot of meta calls and people were going to be using a lot of weird stuff, especially because the tournament was international because it was taking place during Worlds. So I was going to be facing a bunch of Europeans, a bunch of Latin Americans. So I thought that having something that was more balanced against the entire field instead of leaning towards one specific strategy would help reduce variance as much as it possibly could. And that definitely worked in my favor for that tournament.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the roles that Pokemon fit within the team. So we talked about how you pick like a general team archetype and such. Now let's get down to the nitty gritty of what roles you're looking to fill. When you're building, would you start with one of those good stuff Pokemon, one of those balanced Pokemon? Is that what you'd make your anchor of the comp?
Yeah, typically, like you find one Pokemon that you think is like. Also, you could build around one Pokemon that's really good against the meta. But sometimes that doesn't always pan out, right? Like with that team we were talking about earlier where I brought Tentacruel. I knew I was going to bring Tentacruel to that tournament at one point in time because I realized that Arcanine and Finny were dominating the meta and Tentacruel dominates Arcanine and Finny. So I knew that it was going to be the call for that tournament. I kind of just didn't know what team I was going to put it on at the time. I was really confused as to like where to go around that. So I was trying to build around Tentacruel. Like I was trying to be like, oh, if I have this Pokemon, like I have Tentacruel out, what beats Tentacruel? Electric types, I can add some like Lightning Rod on the team. What else beats it? Ground types, I'll add like Ninetales on the team so I can like beat Garchomp. And sometimes that can be successful, but a lot of the times you'll find that adding those like niche Pokemon that are good against the format is typically better reserved for the end of the team building process than the beginning. Because your team ends up not having a lot of good synergy whenever you start with like a niche Pokemon that you're building around. So I think going with that good stuffs team and building from there is really effective. Like in this format, if you want to start building, you could throw like Charizard down. And then just be like, okay, what beats Charizard? Tyranitar. Okay, so I should probably have a Conkeldurr. Okay, Charizard and Conkeldurr work really well together, but I have a problem with Psychic types. So how do I beat Psychic types? And you'll like keep going from there and like find different ways that you can build around that team by starting with a good stuffs point. And there's also different roles that Pokemon fulfill, right? Like there's that good stuffs thing that we've been talking about. But there's other roles that Pokemon fulfill on a team, such as like bulky pivots, sweeper Pokemon, support Pokemon, and another thing I like to call problem solve. I'll get to that a little bit later. But for the bulky pivots, these are Pokemon like Incineroar, Pokemon like Cresselia in like a couple past formats, like 14, 15. But those are Pokemon that add glue to a team. You know, like they give you Intimidate or they give you something bulky that you can switch into to take up some attacks to let you switch around and reposition without losing a mon. And so having like a really bulky Pokemon that can maybe help versus other Pokemon is super effective at doing that. And those are like the bulky pivots. Sweepers are Pokemon that are what you're expecting to be picking up like a majority of your KOs. Like Dragapult is a good stuffs Pokemon, but it also functions as a sweeper at the same time because you can have Life Orb, you can have Policy on it, and once you get that Policy up, you can start picking up easy KOs. Meanwhile, you got your support Pokemon. They're kind of like Indeedee and Whimsicott in this format that can set up that Prankster Tailwind, or they can like offers Psychic Drain support and Follow Me. And the support Pokemon are typically what enable the sweepers. And that's a little bit of a distinction between most like hard good stuffs teams. Because a lot of hard good stuffs teams, they'll have like a couple support Pokemon, of course, but with a lot of like the hyper offensive teams, the support Pokemon are directly influencing the sweeper like a majority of the time. And it doesn't always function like that whenever you build with good stuffs. But a new thing that I kind of really started to understand this format that I didn't understand in previous formats was how problem solver Pokemon really help out in the process of team building.
So,
And have you? Yeah, go ahead.
my favorite example of a problem solver, again, on that Why I Suck episode, we had this harebrained idea that we were going to run Imprison on Indeedity just to deal with the problem that Chandelure presents. So we run a max speed Indeedity on a hard trick room team that had Imprison. So when we saw Chandelure, we could imprison the Imprison and get the trick room off safely.
Yeah,
It,
Imprison denied the Imprison.
it backfired hugely on Showdown in the 2 games that we had because one of them was next to a Pikachu, and then the other one
Paralyzed
had
us.
Choice
So
Scarf and locked itself into Imprison. So it's my favorite little anecdote around problem solver Pokemon. Around Pokemon that can offer a solution to what could be a problem for your comp, even though it didn't necessarily work out for us in that session.
Yeah, and another one that's also like super common in this format is Gastrodon. And I view like these problem solvers as like Pokemon that handle a lot of niche threats that otherwise would take up a lot more resources to beat. Like that Chandelure, right? Like it would take a lot of resources to try to find a way to get around Imprison. Sometimes like an entire other Pokemon on your team people would use to try to get around Imprison Chandelure. But we were able to save a lot of resources by just changing the EVs, changing one move on Indeedee and running max speed. But I think another Pokemon that does that super well is Gastrodon in this format.
Right. So let's talk about the problem that is Vicious Rend. Because
Yes.
that's the problem that's presented to most teams that you plug Gastro in to fix. Vicious Rend is probably one of my favorite things in the format. Vicious Rend and Butterfree are my 2 favorite things in VGC 2020 because I don't like fun.
Because I don't like what the Butterfree always kills. Butterfree kills me. But especially in the last month also, a lot of Colossal teams have been popping up, and everyone's been using Colossal and Surf Dragapult. And Gastrodon is a fantastic answer to that. I mean, some Colossal run max overgrowth just for Gastrodon. But if you run Rindo Berry on Gastrodon, then you don't have to worry about that. You'll typically you'll win the exchange. And it also helps versus Dracovish, it helps versus Colossal, and it helps versus Hard Trick Room, since it's a water type that's slower than Rhyperior, which is great. So Gastrodon, by like having this one Pokemon on your team, you get huge help in 3 really, really niche matchups that otherwise can decimate a team, like Hyper Offense Dracovish, or Colossal archetypes, and Hard Trick Room archetypes. Those are 3 devastating archetypes that just resources that one Pokemon can provide can make the rest, can let you save resources to invest elsewhere in the rest of your team to take neutral matchups and give yourself more advantages in those. So this format especially, I've become really interested in that concept of like these problem solver Pokemon that let you kind of optimize your resource management while team building.
Right, and something that does add a lot of value to it inherently is just the format itself. When you're able to bring 4 or bring 6 and pick 4, like you're not losing anything by having that Gastrodon locked into your comp.
Oh
like,
yeah,
no. That Gastrodon's never a bad Pokemon because the worst case you just don't bring it for one game because it doesn't fill the niche you need it to. But I would say, like, I would venture to say that Gastrodon's useful like 60 to 70% of the time.
Yeah, it depends really. Like it really depends because you could be having sessions where you're bringing it like every other game, or you could have sessions I could imagine where you're not bringing it at all. Because I've used it on like a few teams this format. But even the sessions where like you're not using it, it's still doing work, because this is also something that I think should be touched up on. A lot of times, you'll have a team that's really good, that's 5 Pokemon long, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier that this was something a lot of top players struggle with. They struggle with finding like one last Mon on their team to really round out their team. Like you'll have 5 Mons that you know you're going to use that are really good, but you'll be stuck with like this last slot that you don't know how to fill. And whenever that happens, I think the best thing to do is look at what you're losing to the most and just find one Mon that hard counters that ever living heck. Wow. I went straight into 8th grade there. Out of that team, dude. The one Pokemon that just dominates that team. And that's the Pokemon you want to fill with that slot. And with that one Pokemon, you want to customize it so that all of its EVs, all of its moves are designed to live specific combinations of hits from that one team, and all of its moves are designed to give you an advantage. And you can then, since it's C6 pick 4, only use that Pokemon in that one matchup. And that's something I did on that Seattle Regionals team I was talking about with like Poco and Lunala and stuff. I had Namungus on that team that didn't have Spore on it. That's unheard of because Spore is Spore. If you like, I don't need to explain how good Spore is. But I realized I struggled against one matchup, and in that one matchup I struggled against, if I could lead Tapu Koko and Amoonguss, I would put myself in an amazing position to win that game because I could like Rage Powder, I could clear body or clear Smog Xerneas, I could protect in order to try to like get something next to Amoonguss that could then deal tons of damage. I could stall out turns and just set up speed control with Coco and then bring something in later. And so it had, I think, Protect, Rage Powder, Grass Knot for other Kyogre, and Clear Smog. No Sport. Because I always had Electric Terrain up. Always in this matchup. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing I could ever Sport. So there was never a point to having Sport. And I realized having Protect was so much better as a mix-up in the matchup. And I think I also had Koba Berry because I was a lot of teams had Tornadus on it, and they could like Hurricane you. I don't know. I can't remember the item I had, but I just remember I didn't have Spore, and it won me an entire set having that.
And sometimes a set is all that matters. Like everybody who's watched any or paid attention to the VGC 2020 season, apologies about my dog in the background, but Dallas Regional had like 60 people that ended up. 1 second, I'm sorry. I got a dog thrown in my room.
Dog's going crazy, man.
I got a dog thrown into the office in the middle of my sentence. But VGC Dallas Regional 2020, a ridiculous number of people tied to make top cut, and resistance is what decided that. But if you had a niche Pokemon that got you one more set and got you out of the tiebreaker, like that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything you can do to avoid resistance being a factor in determining if you make top cut.
Dude, resistance is that's an entire podcast on its own. Tournament structure and how god awful resistance is and how many parts broken over the years. As someone who's gotten their soul crushed by resistance, but also cut a regional off of resistance, man, that is a wild ride, roller coaster of emotions that no human being deserves to go down. Not even my worst enemy deserves to sit there languishing over their resistance is good enough.
But yeah, the point, sometimes that niche Pokemon, sometimes that problem solver can be that Pokemon that pushes you over the edge and allows you to win that one extra set. Like, because at the end of the day, like, a set's huge.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, sorry. I was just saying. Oh yeah, I was in confirmation of your statement.
My statement about how resistance is garbage.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the elements on what makes a good team good. Like outside of the super obvious, outside of hey, we're running the core of Togekiss Excadrill.
Dragapult, yeah.
I can never remember Dragapult. I want to say Dracovish every time I say the acronym. I know it's not Dracovish, but the boy has such a special place in my heart that I want to say his name every single time. Um, so what makes a good team a good team? What really makes them stand out against a mediocre to bad comp?
All right, there's like a few elements that go into like having a good team. I think one of which that's really important is not being absurdly weak to a specific type. Because obviously, if you're really weak to fire type, that Charizard's gonna come out and it's just gonna plow through. It's just gonna OHKO your whole team if you have like no resistances to fire at all. So having like a type mix up on your team to where you're able to at least not get OHKO'd by like one specific type, take some hits from a specific type is huge. That's one good element. Another thing is having a balance of physical and special attackers. And I think even if you're a hyper offensive team, having that balance of physical and special attackers is huge because Intimidate is a massively popular ability in VGC. So if you have all physical attackers and you're facing someone who has 2 Mons with Intimidate, you're not winning. You're just not gonna do it. There's just no way you're gonna be able to do enough damage to counteract the offset of your attack that Intimidate does. Because especially when you're hyper offense, you're usually a lot more frail. So you're relying on getting those KOs. So when you're not getting those KOs, you're getting KO'd in return. So Intimidate's a huge factor in that. So having that that balance of physical and special attackers is important. And this is also something I brought up earlier, the concept of those defensive cores, the Fire, Water, Grass cores and Steel Dragon Fairy cores. Having that type of type synergy built into your teams is huge. One of the teams that I made at the start of Series 3, which has seen like insane usage. I think it won the Champions Cup, which was the tournament that Wolf put on, which ended up being the biggest VGC tournament of all time. Actually, no, take it back. It got second, but second's still pretty damn good though. It was like Togekiss, Dragapult, Excadrill as the Steel Dragon Fairy, but the Fire, Water, Grass was Venusaur, Incineroar, and Rotom. So real quick, my version of that team wasn't the one that won. The one that won was Edu's team, but we were using the same 6, which is why I brought it up. And just for the sake of talking about cores, I figured that was important. But I didn't want to make it seem like I built the team that won the tournament. No. I used the 6 that won the tournament, but Edu like built the actual team that won, and then Edu, or the team that got second, and then Edu got second. But the point is, having those each of those cores built into a team just gives you so much flexibility to stall out that Dynamax, to give yourself defensive switch-ins, to have hits that you resist, to be able to, and whenever you break down like the theory of Pokemon, say you have like a grass type out and a water type out, and your grass type's threatened by a fire type. In theory, you can switch out your water type, protect your grass type, switch out your water type, and then the next turn switch your water type back in to protect your grass type and take that resisted hit. Mm-hmm. So not only is having the ability to have these Pokemon that have resistances, not only is that effective, but having the move Protect, which is the most used move in VGC, to be able to give you the ability to switch around these Pokemon to take up these hits and let you be able to pivot is massive as well, and that plays a huge role in it. And so whenever you're building a team, that's something you have to keep in mind. Having Protect on Pokemon is huge to be able to protect and switch to something that can threaten whatever is hurting the Pokemon that you're protecting that turn. That's a massive factor. So having Protect on Pokemon is huge. Also having stuff like Fake Out Pressure, having stuff like Intimidate, having Pivots, Sleep, Redirection, Speed Control. Speed Control is probably the biggest one. Whenever you're building a team, you have to have Speed Control. I think there's maybe like a couple teams that are those really defensive teams that can get away with not having Speed Control. But if you have like a balanced good stuffs team, or if you have a hyper offense team or trick room team, Speed Control is absolutely vital to your strategy and absolutely vital to your success.
Absolutely. We talked about that before. Like, there's a reason we keep coming back to Speed Control. When we're talking about Dynamax, we came back to it. When we were talking about Pokemon, we came back to it. When we were building a trick room team, we came back to it. And like, even in things as simple as being mindful of the speed on the individual Pokemon, like we did with the Indeedee, like speed is such a huge thing that can drastically change the course of not only a match but a whole set.
Yeah, speed control is also one of those things that makes Pokemon so unique compared to other games, like other card games and stuff like that. The fact that if you're moving faster, you're locking down slots is just it's an insanely interesting concept. Or other strategy games, maybe less card games, but I think more like chess is more interesting to make that comparison to. Because chess, you like take turns moving, and you'll move, then your opponent moves, then you move. And Pokemon, you click your moves at the same time.
Right.
And I know a lot of times I've in the past talked a lot about how clicking your moves at the same time is actually the biggest problem in Pokemon because I think it creates a lot of just complete chaos. But at the same time, the reason why it's not detrimental to the game is because of the speed stat and because the chaos is reduced by the fact that you and your opponent, generally speaking, are knowledgeable about which Pokemon is fast and which Pokemon's going to be moving first. And so the speed stat and having speed control is absolutely crucial in any VGC game.
I think the two most common things we talk about are directly related because we always are talking about speed and we're always talking about speed control, and then we're always talking about reducing variance. And
Yes,
they play together perfectly. Like having speed control, having ways to maintain speed control, be it having redirects like follow me or any number of other things. Like, but having ways to maintain speed control directly influences variance and allows you to control it and reduce it and make your team less volatile while still going for your win condition. Because every team,
yeah,
I don't think it's a stretch to say every team's going to have a unique win condition. Like they're going to have a unique scenario that they want to put the other team in and to win the game. Um, and at the end of the day, like that's what you're playing for. Like you're trying to build something that consistently can put your opponent's team in a disadvantageous position and put yourself in a position where you can take the game. So when you're building it, when you're looking for all these consistencies, when you're looking for all the contingencies, that all the things that go together and mesh well, speed control, etc., like it's all about reducing the variance that will detrimentally affect your ability to set up your win condition.
absolutely.
I feel like that was a lot of words to say.
That was a lot
Just
of
win the
words. That was
game.
pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty good. Well, yeah, that's it. That's the other thing. Like, a lot of times people go insane trying to like build the perfect team and get this perfect balance of like typing, get this perfect balance of support, like get the perfect core, like get the perfect combination together. But sometimes you just need to run two Pokemon of the same type. Like if that's the play, then that's the play. What matters more than building the perfect team is winning games. You know, because that Tentacruel team, something that's interesting about it, I didn't have a single ground resist on the team. I had two water types and two fire types on the team. I had Arcanine and Marowak, and I had Tapu Fini, and I had Tentacruel. It's crazy to look at that and think, wait, how is this? The team doesn't have like this defensive synergy, but it was more offensive in its nature. It had Snorlax on it to set up as well as like kind of like that bulky anchor, like that defensive anchor of the team. But at the end of the day, what matters is having a team that wins games.
No, absolutely. And shout out to my Snorlax sitting next to me, the real goat. Um, when would you recommend somebody gets into team building? Because we talked before about how team building is a fundamental concept and something that's important for everybody to understand when they get into VGC. But when would you recommend a new player take on the challenge of building their own team?
I think that you should always be practicing team building to some extent. Like you should never, like there shouldn't be a time where you're never not thinking about building a team that could be successful. And there should never be a time where you're not trying to improve your team building skills. And that's because being a world class team builder increases the ceiling of what you can accomplish. And if you are not a world class team builder, it is incredibly difficult to win like large tournaments. Because most of the people who win worlds have been winning worlds and doing excellent at worlds with teams that they've built themselves. Because they're coming up with these innovative strategies that no one's played against yet. So they're able to take these innovative strategies and use them to good effect. However, like at the same time, I'd maybe argue a lot of regionals have been won with standard teams or teams that other people have built, teams that you've borrowed from. So it's not a necessity that you build your own team, but it definitely increases the ceiling of what you can accomplish. And here's the complicated aspect of this. And it's something that we talked about a little bit earlier. When you're newer to the game, you don't know everything that goes into building a good team. Like you don't understand every element that makes a good team successful. And
Right.
even me, who's been playing the game for like 4 or 5 years, I struggle building my own teams. I sometimes have a hard time putting the pieces together. But if someone sends me a paste of a team, I'll be able to look at it and be like, oh yeah, this team can win a regional. Like I can look at a paste and be like, yeah, this team can win a regional. Like whenever I got that team that I got second with at Seattle, right? That's whenever I saw that pace, at first I was like, I don't know. Then I thought about it for a bit, and I was like, oh wait, this team can win a regional easily. I've had like multiple times. Every single time I've like cut a regional, before the regional started, I knew I was going to cut because of the team, and because I'm able to, with my experience, look at a team and understand like if this team is good enough. The problem is, even if I'm not skilled enough to be able to piece those pieces together on my own. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of newer players don't really have that. So I think it's a lot more economic for a lot of newer players to play with other teams that have been proven and have been built by top players to get that understanding of what goes into a team that makes it successful. But I also think they should be trying to build their own teams at the same time, because if you're never building your own teams at teams like while you're doing that, then you don't even have like a base to expand your team building skill upon to begin with. Like you need to have that base of team building to expand your team building skills on.
Right.
But I just think that the amount of time you spend building should be significantly less than playing when you're a new player, basically.
I think something important that you're kind of referencing, um, when you're new to the game, like when you're in a situation where I am, where you have a core fundamental understanding of the game, but not a really deep understanding of VGC and what
Yeah.
goes into competitive teams, I would say you want to play until you can understand and point out and be like, oh, he's doing this because, or he's doing that EV spread because, and you're able to kind of understand the common teams, understand the teams that are built by top players. When you can point
Yeah.
to it and you can fully explain why everything is done the way it is done without outside resources, that's when I think you're kind of ready to maybe venture out on your own, and you're going to fail, but just embrace the failure and learn from it and develop as a team builder.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good, like really insightful point as well. That's kind of the mark of where you can try to take your game to the next level. And I think in regards to newer players needing to spend more time practicing than building, I think the inverse is probably true for people who have been playing for a lot of years. Like if you have like a really, really good game sense and understand the mechanics of battling like 100% and have been going to events for a long time, at that point it's probably more optimal to spend your time more team building to take your play to the next level and take your results to the next level than it is playing, because at that point I think team building is the area where you as a player could probably be improving the most.
Absolutely. And there's a lot going into team building and going into this than we could possibly hope to cover in one episode of this podcast. Like we haven't even hinted about the existence of EVs and IVs yet. We haven't talked about items yet. Like we've mentioned them in passing in the last 3 episodes that we've done, but we haven't taken a deep dive into any of those yet. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, when are they going to talk about choosing items for your team? We'll get there. It's a very vast subject with so many different caveats that it's kind of impossible to cover it all in one go. But that's one of the things that I'm most interested in about this series when we started it was much how much meat and potatoes there is, how much topic there is that we could actually cover. And you can spend just like you can spend an hour talking about Trick Room, you can spend an hour talking about items. You can probably take an hour per item easily and talk about
Yeah.
different applications of it and why it's good, and try to trying to break down items is something that like has been in the back of my head every time we talk about this and going over the outline. But it's just something I wanted to address and make sure that if you're listening to this and wondering if when we're going to get to items, the answer is probably in another episode. Well, definitely
Yeah.
another episode because we got about 5 minutes left, and I can assure you we're not going to get to items in that 5 minutes.
Dude, yeah, items is an entire podcast topic on its own because I mean, even items in VGC 2020 could be an entire podcast topic on its own.
Mhm.
Like just for this one specific format. Because you can go into how like, oh, power herb is like one of the most useless items, unless you have a Xerneas, in which case all of a sudden power herbs is now like the best item in the game. It goes from being worthless to the best item in the snap of a finger.
What was the
Like,
berry? The berry you ended up putting on Butterfree in that Why I Suck episode?
oh, Charty Berry.
Yeah, so just random. Like I knew the item existed, still don't know the name of it, but it had a niche role that it filled in this team building. So if you want to see, like, I know I'm plugging my own stuff all the time. That's what I do. But if you want to see team building in practice, that episode's on my Twitch right now and will be up on YouTube tomorrow. And definitely recommend taking a look at it and just watching the thought process unfold organically rather than just a
Yeah.
discussion.
And that's the one more thing about team building. I can't believe I almost didn't mention this until now. The most important aspect of team building is that you find people to do it with. That is the most important part of team building. It's probably the most important part of Pokemon, to be honest. Is
Right?
having like a network of people who you build with, people who you practice with, and people who you bounce off ideas with. I don't think I have built a team on my own since 2016. 2016, and I didn't cut a regional in the year 2016. That was my first year playing. But from the end of 2016 onward, I have never gone into a regional without showing someone my team, without getting feedback on my team, without having people like support me throughout the team building process. Because multiple minds are way better than one mind. And minds in Pokemon are very, very different. A lot of times people get stuck into their own ways. You don't see obvious things that are right in front of you. And oftentimes it takes one person like pitching an idea or pitching like a Pokemon or pitching a different move you can put on a team or a different EV spread that can save an entire tournament run.
Mm-hmm. No, we talked about the importance of like clutching out one situation can change a tournament run drastically. Like it can be the difference in top cutting and being in that 40-person tie where you don't have proper resistance. Shout out to resistance again. Um, that being said, in the first episode of the podcast, we spoke for a couple minutes about resources that were available for team building and for like somebody new to the community. I just want to mention again, Discord servers are your best friend. There are so many local based and national level, and there's hundreds of Discords out there with valuable information on it that if you don't, like if you're someone completely new to VGC and you don't have friends to play with, nowadays like it's easier than ever to make that group of friends to team build with, even if they're not the best players in the world. Like you have to start somewhere, and starting with a group of people to discuss the game with is always better than trying to formulate these ideas and these
Yeah.
teams on your own.
And if you look at even all these players who top cut worlds with building their own teams, none of them are building their teams alone either. They're all building their teams with other people. They all have like groups, team building groups that they're in, and they'll show up to events with those teams as well. Almost never will someone show up and win an event with a team that they made themselves without any input from anyone else.
Absolutely. But it is time to be wrapping up this episode. Anything you'd like to plug before we go?
Probably just my Twitter, really, that's where everything's popping off at Lou21. That's 2 U's right there, LOUUU21. So you guys are listening to this, like what you hear, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I often I don't necessarily tweet about a lot of like VGC theory stuff on my Twitter. I normally just like kind of take Twitter lightheartedly and talk about stuff in a joking way in the VGC community. But if you're into VGC at all, then go ahead and give me a follow. I'd appreciate it.
All right. And again, I am Moo. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch at Moo_SSB. You can find Last Stop Gaming on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at Last Stop Gaming. You can also follow laststopgaming.com and find Last Stop Gaming podcasts on Spotify. That's where all these episodes will go up immediately after they're recorded live on my channel on we do put out content every single day. Mondays we do. I hate you, Shelby. Ruining my plugs. You're the worst. Follow Shelby on Twitter at Daddy Saurus with two S's at the end. She's hilarious.
Daddy Taurus.
She's a huge shit poster, and I love her for it. Go follow her. Then half my tweets will suddenly make sense because half my content's stolen from her. But back to Last Saw Gaming and the content we put out every single day of the week. On Mondays, typically we have Moose Monday Musings. We had the podcast this week due to issues with Discord, so we had to move the podcast back a day. But normally, Moose Monday Musings is on Mondays, where we talk about whatever subject crosses my mind. It's kind of my day to talk about subjects that I normally wouldn't talk about on the LSG podcast. We've talked about everything from the Texas Smash scene to uh, Mario Maker. So it's just a good little escape for me personally. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays are the LSG Galaxy Cup, a series of 3 Smash Bros. Ultimate tournaments. On Tuesdays, we do random 1v1s. On Wednesdays, we do 2 versus 2. And on Saturdays, we do a traditional singles bracket. West Texas has been showing up in droves and dominating that event. Shout out to the Lubbock boys and West Texas boys. Those guys have been, it's been fun to watch. On Thursdays, we do Why I Suck, which I hinted about us doing one on Pokemon in the past. Most of them are Smash centered. I want to get into other games as well. Last week's episode was centered around learning Palutena, where we took a deep dive into the frame data and moveset of that character in Smash Ultimate, and what makes the character strong and how to utilize its moveset effectively. Um, do not worry, that information doesn't come from me. Like again, like this podcast, like I tend to just be a person that opens my mouth and talks and doesn't really know a whole lot. Like I rely heavily on guests like Lou and last week's LSG Zai, #2 in Louisiana. Like I rely a lot on others to get you guys the best information possible for those type of things. Fridays, First Stock Friday, a series of first to 10 between some of the best Smash Ultimate talent in Texas. We've had players like Hugh, Yellow Rello, the infamous 26 ping Grayson, best Rob in Texas, probably the best Rob in the world if we're being completely honest. A lot of high quality players playing first to 10 matches. Unfortunately over Wi-Fi, but we don't have a whole lot to offer otherwise going on in Smash Ultimate right now. We're all kind of stuck with Wi-Fi events. And then as always on Sundays, the LSG podcast. Hope to see you all again soon, and that's it.
Peace.
Lots of plugs. We'll see y'all next time.